Benvenute e benvenuti nel percorso di avvicinamento a Forum PA 2021. Oggi incontriamo Paul Sangeet, fondatore di Platformation Labs e autore del bestseller Platform Revolution. Insieme a Sangeet parleremo del rapporto che lega la platform economy e la pubblica amministrazione, in un'intervista che è solo un'anticipazione di quel che Sangeet ci dirà nel corso del nostro evento dal 21 al 25 giugno. We are glad to have here Paul Sangeet, founder of Platformation Labs and author of Platform Revolution. Welcome.
Thank you, Mauro.
We strongly wanted to have you among our hosts to better investigate what links public administration, platforms, and platform economy. So I just move on to the first question. These difficult months of health emergency have posed a series of difficult challenges to the public administration, above all that of operational continuity. To do this, public administrations have been forced to accelerate the digital transition process, both on the organizational level and also on the service one. Could this crisis be an opportunity to bring in the public sector that digital thinking paradigm that around the world, and especially in the private sector, seems to have taken the stage?
I do believe that this is an unparalleled opportunity for the public sector to adopt digital thinking. And if you look at adoption of digitization and digital thinking in general, whether on the consumer side or on the enterprise side, in the private sector itself, the adoption has always been driven by external factors like this. So if you look at how e-commerce took off after the SARS outbreak in China, and that led to Alibaba gaining adoption, that's a great example of how that happened. Or last year when COVID happened in the US, companies like Venmo, Square, a lot of these payments companies, they got a lot of consumer adoption because they were able to disburse the government grants faster than the banks. And so it's usually around these times that entirely new behavior gets created, massive large-scale adoption of new technologies happen. And we've seen that happen with the private sector repeatedly. And I believe this is a strong opportunity for the public administration and for governments in particular to also adopt digital thinking and technology at this particular point. What we should be careful about when we're thinking about governments adopting technology using situations like this is that we should still keep privacy and individual agency at the center of any such adoption, because especially this is when you think of surveillance technologies and contact tracing, this is an excellent opportunity for that to be adopted. And while there are good outcomes of that adoption, we should ensure that it does not compromise individual agency. So I do believe that it's a time when governments should be thinking about this as long as they do it in the right framework.
Thank you. My second question is more about the relationship between public administration and platforms. So if you think about public administration and everything that orbits around it, it could be easily considered in the eyes of an expert like you as a great platform whose potential is enormous, but which still struggles to put into practice those principles of platforms, namely the interoperability of services, the sharing of services, the interoperability among entities. And in your book, you mentioned 4 structural elements necessary to implement a model performance. These are creation, curation, customization, and consumption. Do you believe that these elements could also be applied to the world of public administration? And if yes, what would change with respect to an economy model that aimed also at profit, like the private ones, considering that instead, the final goal of public administration is that of simply providing a quality service to citizens.
Absolutely. So let me address the first part first. So when we think about private sectors being primarily for profit, we do need to appreciate that profit is merely the outcome of value capture. And in order to get to value capture, you need a compelling way to create value. So value creation that applies in a for-profit model can still continue to apply in a government model. What changes in a public administration and government model is how we think about value capture fundamentally changes. We don't extract value necessarily. We look for other metrics of economic output that get generated as modes of value capture. But fundamentally, value creation remains the same. So if you think of that, and with that assumption, if we believe that what's worked in for-profit private models can also be applied to government, what's important is that if you want to build a platform position in any system, you need to look at a few specific things. First, you need to be in a position of centrality and orchestration. And what I mean by that is that if you're a platform, you should have the ability to understand your various stakeholders, to understand them in real time, to understand data about them in detail, and use that to perform the right orchestration and matchmaking functions. What that means is that if you're, for example, a public administration body in, say, healthcare, you should have a clear data commons mechanism through which healthcare data can be standardized, shared, and used to coordinate multiple stakeholders in the healthcare value chain. If you don't do that, if you're relying on command and control processes to orchestrate this whole system, then that's not going to scale, and you're going to be the central point of failure. So I think the challenge that public administration, which is not digitally forward and is not transformed appropriately, the challenge that they have is that they are in a central position, but they're creating a bottleneck instead of scalable orchestration. So that's the first piece that's important. The second thing that's important is that you're really a platform if you're helping everybody else around you scale up on top of you. If you're just acting as a bottleneck in between, then you're not really a platform. You're more of an intermediary that is not scalable. And we've seen many such intermediaries that are not platforms, for example, brokers, middlemen. And the last thing we want is public administration to suffer from those inefficiencies. So what's important is that if we were to think of public administration as a platform, we need to ensure that all government and non-government bodies that work alongside it, they are able to scale up because of it. A really good example of this, I would say, is what's happening in India, for instance, where they've created the India Stack, which is a public-private, created in a public-private partnership model. And the India Stack provides a common set of capabilities by which identity can be ascertained, data can be, or data privacy and data custodianship can be managed, payments can be managed across different payment systems. And so we now have companies like Google and Facebook building on top of this rather than building separate from the government. Another example is possibly China, where, of course, the government has a bigger position in how it works with the private sector, but it's still created a framework for orchestration, which is the digital Silk Road model. And if you look at a company like Alibaba, it's working alongside the government in that digital Silk Road model. There are other issues around China, which I don't want to get into, but my main point is that there has to be a mechanism by which a government or public administration body leverages interoperability, leverages data commons, leverages common shared digital infrastructure to work in a public-private cooperation model rather than relying on traditional command and control mechanisms. So that's how I would think about applying a platform framework to government.
Thank you, brilliant. And in fact, my last question is about the public-private partnership. And more specifically, I would like to ask you, how should this public-private partnership be understood in this new public administration that is emerging from the post-COVID-19 recovery policies? More in detail, do you believe that these possible changes in public administration in this platform economy perspective that you mentioned must necessarily pass from the collaboration with the private sector, or do you think that it is possible to structure this change internally, in the sense that maybe through upskilling and reskilling of people that are already inside the public administration, could be this possible?
I do. I believe that the public sector has its strengths and weaknesses, and the private sector has strengths and weaknesses. And neither of them in themselves can create large systemic solutions of the type we're talking about. So it has to be a public-private partnership. Now, what's changing in terms of public-private partnership is that in the past, public-private partnership used to be about setting up committees, setting up consensus, setting up different kinds of working groups that would manage projects, and those projects were not scalable. There would be a project on a particular theme, there would be another disconnected, siloed project on another theme. What I believe is going to change as we move forward is that public-private partnership will be built on top of a common definition of standards and a common shared digital infrastructure. And I live in Singapore, and this is where I'm already seeing this happen. I've worked extensively with the government out here as well. And what we see, whether you look at complex issues like financial inclusion and financial innovation, or you look at Singapore's position as a trade hub, or even if you look at something internal to Singapore like a last mile logistics infrastructure, in all these cases, the government and the private sector are working together to create common standards and create common infrastructure on which the private sector can then scale up and build out. So the government has the advantage, the public sector has the advantage to drive a lot of behavioral change through, for example, compliance. But the private sector has the advantage of leading innovation on top of this infrastructure. So once an infrastructure gets adopted, let's say a new accounting mechanism gets adopted, new innovation, new complementary innovation on top of it, that's not what the public sector should be building. That's where the private sector should come in. And that, I believe, is the fundamental model in which we will see innovation as we move forward. And I believe even if you look at a geography like the European Union, that's a model that would help the European Union grow and scale much faster if they could, across countries as well, work on common standards and common infrastructure, which then enables the private sector to scale up on top of that. So I believe that's going to be the centerpiece of how public-private cooperation happens moving forward. The countries that adopt it will not just move faster than the other countries that do not, but increasingly they will also export their model to other countries, and that will help them to extend their influence beyond just their geographic borders. So we'll see a new form of globalization that is built around the export of standards and infrastructure globally, and countries working together around common standards for digital goods, for instance, and around common infrastructures. That would be, to a large extent, how future global cooperation is going to happen.
Thank you so much, Paul Sangeet, founder of Platformation Labs and author of Platform Revolution. Our community is looking forward to hear you again at Forum PA 2021.
Thank you, Mauro. Looking forward to it as well.